In the spring of 1945, something extraordinary was falling from American skies. Silent, deadly, and completely unexpected. Thousands of weapons launched from the other side of the Pacific Ocean, riding the jet stream across 6,000 miles of open water. This is the story of Fugo, Japan's secret balloon bomb campaign, one of the most audacious and innovative weapons of World War II. By 1944, Imperial Japan faced a devastating reality. American B-29 bombers were pounding Japanese cities into rubble. The empire needed a way to strike back at the American homeland. But how? Japan's navy was crippled. Its air force couldn't reach the mainland United States. Traditional retaliation seemed impossible. Enter Major General Tsuyoshi Kusaba of the Imperial Japanese Army's No. 9 Research Laboratory. Kusaba and his team had been studying meteorological reports from the Pacific. They had discovered something remarkable, a powerful air current flowing from west to east at high altitude, what we now call the jet stream. The concept was revolutionary. Launch thousands of hydrogen-filled balloons carrying incendiary and explosive devices from Japan's eastern coast. Let the jet stream carry them across the Pacific. In 3 to 4 days, these silent weapons would rain down on American forests, cities and farmland, sparking chaos and terror. Japanese meteorologists calculated that winds at 30,000 feet could reach speeds of 200 miles per hour during winter months. If they could build a balloon capable of maintaining this altitude and surviving the journey, they could strike the American mainland with virtually no risk to Japanese forces. The design that emerged was ingenious. Each Fugo balloon measured 33 feet in diameter when fully inflated, roughly the size of a 4-story building. But the true innovation lay in its construction. In factories across Japan, thousands of workers, mostly women and teenage schoolgirls, assembled these weapons by hand. They used washi, traditional Japanese paper made from mulberry bushes, layering 4 sheets together with konnyaku potato paste as adhesive. The result was surprisingly strong, tough enough to withstand the brutal conditions of high-altitude flight. Each balloon carried a sophisticated automatic altitude control system. Sand-filled ballast bags hung from the gondola. When the balloon dropped below 30,000 feet, a barometric switch would automatically release 2 sandbags, lifting it back to optimal altitude. When it rose too high, an expandable blow-off valve would release hydrogen. This elegant system could theoretically keep the balloon aloft for up to 80 hours. The payload was deadly simple. 1 33-pound anti-personnel bomb and 2 incendiary devices designed to start forest fires. After approximately 70 hours, enough time to cross the Pacific, the balloon would automatically release its bombs and self-destruct. On November 3, 1944, the first Fugo balloons lifted off from beaches along Japan's eastern coast. Launch sites stretched from Ichinomiya to Otsu. In the months that followed, approximately 9,000 balloon bombs would be released into the Pacific winds. The launches occurred in waves, timed with favorable weather conditions. Teams of soldiers and civilians would inflate the massive balloons with hydrogen, attach the payloads, and release them skyward. Within minutes, they would disappear into the clouds, beginning their silent journey across the ocean. The Japanese military codenamed them Fugo, literally fire balloon. To the Americans who would encounter them, they would become known simply as balloon bombs or Japanese balloon bombs. December 1944. A rancher near Thermopolis, Wyoming, discovered something strange in his field, a large deflated balloon with unusual markings and what appeared to be bombs attached. He immediately contacted authorities. Within days, more reports flooded in. A balloon landed near Kalispell, Montana. Another was spotted over Yarrington, Nevada. Navy personnel recovered devices from the ocean off California. The pattern was unmistakable. America was under attack. Military intelligence was baffled. How were Japanese weapons reaching the mainland United States? The technology required seemed impossible. Initial theories ranged from submarines launching them just off the coast to German U-boats deployed by Japan. The idea that these devices had traveled over 6,000 miles seemed too far-fetched to consider seriously. It took geological analysis to crack the mystery. Scientists examined the sand in the ballast bags. Its composition was unique. Microscopic marine organisms called diatoms revealed the sand came from specific beaches on Japan's coast. The impossible had become reality. Japan was striking America from across the Pacific Ocean. The U.S. government faced a critical decision. Hundreds, possibly thousands of these balloons were landing across the western states and even reaching as far east as Michigan. Public panic could be catastrophic. But there was another concern. Japan had no way of knowing if their weapons were reaching America or falling harmlessly into the ocean. If American media reported the balloons, Japan would know their weapon was working and might intensify the campaign. Silence became a weapon. On January 4, 1945, the Office of Censorship issued a request to American media: complete silence about the balloon bombs. Newspaper editors, radio broadcasters, and even local officials were asked not to mention the devices. Remarkably, the media complied. The American public remained largely unaware that their country was under attack. Meanwhile, the military mobilized. The Western Defense Command established protocols for dealing with discovered balloons. Forest rangers, firefighters, and civilians in western states received classified briefings. Military units began tracking patterns, trying to predict where the next balloons might land. But the balloons didn't respect predictions. They landed in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, Arizona, Montana, Idaho, Nevada, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Kansas, Iowa, Texas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, British Columbia, and even as far as the Yukon Territory. One balloon allegedly reached as far as Michigan, over 5,000 miles from its launch point. May 5, 1945. The war in Europe was ending. Victory seemed within reach. On this spring morning, Reverend Archie Mitchell and his pregnant wife Elsie planned a church picnic near Bly, Oregon. 5 children from their Sunday school joined them: Jay Gifford, Edward Engen, Sherman Shoemaker, Dick Patska, and his sister Joan. Reverend Mitchell drove ahead to find a picnic spot while Elsie and the children followed on foot. The forest was beautiful that day. Tall pines, spring wildflowers, the promise of a perfect afternoon. Then, one of the children noticed something unusual in the trees. A large object, partially deflated, tangled in the branches. They called to Mrs. Mitchell. What happened next took only seconds. As they approached the object, someone touched it. The bomb exploded. Reverend Mitchell heard the blast from where he'd parked the car. He ran back toward the sound. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. Elsie Mitchell, 5 months pregnant, was dead. All 5 children, Jay, Edward, Sherman, Dick, and Joan, were killed instantly. They ranged in age from 11 to 14 years old. They were the only combat casualties on the U.S. mainland during World War II. The military arrived within hours, but they faced an impossible dilemma. The tragedy proved these balloons were genuinely dangerous. The public needed to be warned. But breaking the media silence might encourage Japan to continue the campaign. After urgent deliberation, officials decided to release limited information. On May 22, 1945, newspapers were finally permitted to mention the balloon bombs, but only in general terms, with no details about the Mitchell tragedy or the extent of the bombardment. By then, the campaign was already winding down. Japan's resources were depleted. American firebombing had destroyed the hydrogen-producing facilities necessary for balloon production. The last balloons were launched in April 1945. Of approximately 9,000 balloons launched, only about 300 were documented landing or being recovered in North America. The actual number was certainly higher. Many fell in remote wilderness areas and were never found. Some may still lie undiscovered in the forests and mountains of the American West. The balloons caused minimal damage to infrastructure. A few started small forest fires, quickly contained. One balloon drifted over the Manhattan Project's Hanford site in Washington state, causing a brief power outage when it struck a power line. Unknowingly, it had come dangerously close to disrupting the American atomic bomb program. But the psychological impact was significant. The balloons proved that no part of America was beyond Japan's reach. They demonstrated that warfare had evolved beyond traditional boundaries. The age of intercontinental weapons had begun. When the war ended in August 1945, the full story began to emerge. American occupation forces discovered the balloon production facilities. They interviewed the women and schoolgirls who had built them. The scope and sophistication of the program surprised even hardened military intelligence officers. The workers had no idea where the balloons were going or what they were for. Most believed they were making equipment for weather observation. When they learned the truth that their work had killed 6 Americans, many were devastated. Japanese military records revealed the program's full scale. 9,000 balloons launched at a cost of millions of yen. The military had hoped the balloons would spark massive forest fires, destroy crops, and terrorize the American population. They imagined the Pacific Northwest engulfed in flames, American resources diverted to firefighting, civilian morale shattered, but Japan never knew the campaign's results. The American media blackout had worked perfectly. When no reports appeared in U.S. newspapers or radio broadcasts, Japanese military leaders concluded the balloons were failing into the ocean. The program was deemed a failure and quietly abandoned. From a technical standpoint, the Fugo balloons represented a remarkable achievement. They were the first weapons to use the jet stream for long-range attack. They were the first intercontinental weapons in history, and they demonstrated principles that would influence future military technology. The automatic altitude control system was particularly sophisticated. Using 1940s technology, Japanese engineers created a device that could maintain optimal altitude for days without human intervention. Modern military analysts recognize it as a precursor to today's autonomous weapons systems. The balloons also pioneered the concept of fire-and-forget weapons, launched without guidance, designed to find their targets automatically. This principle would later inform the development of cruise missiles and smart bombs. Today, a stone monument stands near Bly, Oregon, marking the site where Elsie Mitchell and 5 children lost their lives. It's a quiet place often overlooked by travelers, but it represents something profound. The Mitchell tragedy reminds us that war respects no boundaries. The victims were civilians enjoying a spring day in the forest, thousands of miles from any battlefield. They never heard an air raid siren. They saw no approaching enemy. They were killed by a weapon launched from across an ocean, carried by winds they couldn't see, from a country most had never thought about. Every year, a small ceremony is held at the monument. Relatives of the victims attend. Local residents come to remember. Veterans organizations lay wreaths. It's a reminder that even the most remote corners of America were touched by World War II. Elsie Mitchell was a pastor's wife who loved teaching Sunday school. Jay Gifford dreamed of becoming a pilot. Edward Engen was the youngest, just 11 years old. Sherman Shoemaker loved baseball. Joan and Dick Patsky were siblings, inseparable friends. They were ordinary Americans living extraordinary lives in ordinary times. And they became history's footnotes, the only World War II combat casualties on the U.S. mainland. The Fugo campaign lasted only 6 months. Of 9,000 balloons launched, perhaps 1,000 reached North America. Only 6 people died. In the vast scope of World War II, these numbers seem insignificant. Millions died in combat. Cities were incinerated. Entire populations were displaced. But the Fugo balloons represent something larger than their body count or damage inflicted. They marked a turning point in warfare, the moment when distance ceased to protect anyone. If Japan could strike America from 6,000 miles away using technology from 1944, what would future wars look like? Today we live in that future. Drones strike targets on the other side of the world. Intercontinental ballistic missiles can reach any point on Earth in under an hour. Cyber attacks cross borders invisibly, striking infrastructure without physical weapons. The Fugo balloons were primitive by modern standards, paper and string, riding the wind. But they asked a question that still haunts us. In a world where anyone can strike anywhere, how do we protect ourselves? How do we find safety? Perhaps the answer lies not in technology or tactics, but in remembering. Remembering that weapons have consequences beyond their intended targets. Remembering that every casualty is a person with a name, a story, a life cut short. Remembering Elsie, Jay, Edward, Sherman, Joan, and Dick. 6 Americans who died in an Oregon forest on a beautiful spring day, victims of a war they barely knew existed. This is the story of Fugo, Japan's secret weapon, America's silent invasion, and a tragedy that reminds us that in war, there are no safe places. Only memories and the hope that by remembering we might one day find peace.